Привіт! I'm Chuckleinik, a Ukrainian-American who was baptized with the name Yaroslav, which also happens to be the name that I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. Well, I've gotten into this project of documenting kind of all things Slavic, as far as dealing with Slavic mythology and folklore, and also delving into some of the history, at least for the medieval period. So it's taken me a while. It's the 35th chapter in this set of videos, and I decided it's time to cover the vampire. And that's probably the most distinctive of all the Slavic spirits, and probably best known to the rest of the world if you're stepping outside of Eastern Europe. And who doesn't immediately think of a shadowy figure rising up from a coffin, and it's going to be sucking the blood of the living, and thinking about crosses being used as a method of defense, of stakes being driven through the heart. It's the vampire. Actually, Russians and Ukrainians call him an Upyri. Belarusians, they call him a Upyri. And he's just real popular throughout Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, most of Eastern Europe, including the non-Slavic areas of Romania and Hungary. By the way, he's not a popular figure inside Russian mythology and folklore, and an Upyri could also be, in Russia, could be either a vampire or a werewolf. I'll cover werewolves in another video, though. All right, so before we get any further into playing around with the vampire or the Upyri, you got to get this thing straight in your heads about what Slavs believed. They thought there was a very stark distinction between the soul and the body. The soul was not considered perishable. And when someone died, Slavs believed that the soul kind of went on walkabout, and it would wander its neighborhood and its workplace for 40 days. And that date is kind of key. I remember dealing with the various, funerals that I had to deal with my parents and my sister, and there was always some sort of a, special meal that was prepared at church, to mark the 40-day point. And so with this 40-day thing, the soul could be doing all sorts of things. It could be, re-entering a corpse, or re-entering the corpse of the deceased, or it could be just passing through. And it was very important that when someone died, to leave a window or a door open in the house for the soul to pass through at its leisure. And I remember very distinctly my mom suddenly opening up every window in the house, and they stayed open. And eventually I kind of got the idea of what was going on. So when an individual would die, there was a big deal about putting a lot of stress on proper burial rites to ensure the soul's purity and peace as it separates from the body and moves on to the afterlife. So the death of an unbaptized child, or a violent or untimely death, or the death of a grievous sinner, like a sorcerer or a murderer, they're all grounds for the soul to become unclean after death. Also, a soul could be made unclean if its body was not given a proper burial. And a body not given a proper burial could be susceptible to possession by other unclean souls or spirits. And Slavs are really afraid of those unclean souls because of the potential for taking vengeance. And in a way that kind of connects with the story of the Rusalka, who often was unbaptized. The thing is, you get the idea of, you know, with the cross being used as a means of defense, and the whole concept of the proper burial, that the vampire was basically, the legend was kind of corralled by Christianity. Uh, the legend was around way before, and even though there's variations in all of the Slavic and non-Slavic countries, there's this idea of an unclean spirit. It's possessing a decomposing body. This undead creature needs the blood of the living, to sustain its body's existence. It's considered to be vengeful, jealous towards the living. But right now we're going to get into like some of those folk beliefs. Okay, so who could become an Upyri? Maybe you were cursed before death. Or maybe you just happened to die suddenly and unexpectedly. Or maybe your corpse got desecrated. You could be a dead person over whom an animal jumped. A living person over whom an animal jumped. And so that could turn you into an Upyri. If you're a suicide victim, if you're a witch, right? You're an unchristened child. Of course, that kind of gets into the Rusalka territory. Also, if you were killed by another Upyri, there's your destiny. And now we start going after who's different. If you are someone different in the community, chances are you could become an Upyri. So you could be a redhead. There's a warning sign about you. Or if you're left-handed, which means I'm toast. If you've got a limp, and that's happened before. If you have a unibrow, okay, if you're got a double set of teeth, so you got like that little set hidden in the back, or you have a gray mark on your back, if you're religiously one of the others. So let's say you happen to be a Lutheran in a Catholic community, or you're Jewish in an Eastern Orthodox community, likely you're gonna be thought of as someone who could potentially become a Upyri. You might also just behave suspiciously, like you like to go for walks in the moonlight, or you happen to have a big head, or you have no armpit or pubic hair, which was kind of interesting. All right, and a lot of these ideas are reproduced in legends and ethnographic records about Strigoi and Upyrs. All right, maybe having two hearts or two souls. I'll talk about the Strigoi later. Women who die during or after childbirth. You're particularly vulnerable to being transformed into an Upyri. They could return to an orphan child as Upyrs to feed at night, to feed upon the child. This is why in Silesia, those who died in childbirth were buried at the edge of the cemetery near the wall. All right, let's throw in some more stuff. If the corpse doesn't have rigor mortis, or maybe it has a flushed face, or there's blood under the nails, those are signs that a deceased person could become an Upyri. Maybe, family members are fatigued, or they have a pallor, or they're sweating, or recurring nightmares. The dead person might become an Upyri. If the family burns a portrait or a photograph, a picture of the deceased, that could turn someone into an Upyr. And if you bury somebody in an old shirt, that could do it too, which is interesting because that kind of tells you you need to have kind of like new funeral clothes. All right. One way to recognize an Upyr was to have an innocent child ride a horse into the cemetery and have them indicate the grave of an Upyr. Okay, all that stuff about, hey, they're invisible in mirrors. Slavic legends say otherwise, that they show up in the evening in mirrors. So in certain regions, people aren't going to look into mirrors after dusk. Maybe it's kind of like the Bloody Mary thing. All right. Some Upyrs could arrive at night carrying their heads, in their arms. Or if the head's not detached, it's glowing with wolf-like eyes. Some of them can cause problems during the daytime, climbing on bell towers and killing everyone who heard their shriek. They're going to drink the blood of humans and use their superhuman strength to tear their victims to shreds. They can also kill with their breath or their shrieks. And, of course, the Upyr or the vampires harassing people at night, making them suffocate or making them sleepwalk. There were claims of husbands and wives becoming Upyri and visiting the widowed spouse after death. They would do the chores they did during lifetime, and sometimes they would harass the family members. Okay, so you've identified a potential Upyr or a vampire. How do you solve the problem? Well, let's see. Dig up the body, and you put garlic heads in there, or in the mouth, or a small brick, or an iron chunk placed in the mouth before burial. Branches of wild rose or hawthorn or blackthorn put into the coffin. You might remove the head and place it between the legs of the corpse, and the corpse would be burned and nailed to the coffin. It might be repositioned face down because apparently the Upyr is not terribly bright and is going to go in the other direction, the direction he or she is facing in. If you come across an Upyr or a vampire at night, one remedy was to keep them from returning to the grave, and at dawn it would go and disappear, or it would change into tar. And there's a story of a Cossack who was out at night, and either he stumbled across an Upyr or the Upyr stumbled across him. And there is this tremendous epic fight that is supposed to take place, and the Upyr is obviously trying to, fight the Cossack, and the Cossack is just fighting for his life, fighting tooth and nail. Yeah, that might be the appropriate phrase. And kept the fight going until dawn, when the Upyr went back into the grave. Well, the Cossack immediately gets the villagers, and they come out and they set fire to the body and do all sorts of badness. But then they have to take care of another problem, because as the body is burning, the Upyr is turning into a number of different creatures, and they're all kind of scattering. So snakes and frogs and rats and all that good stuff are trying to escape the flames, and if one of those can get away, the Upyr will continue to live. So, all right, that's what we got on the Upyr or the vampire. I'm going to cover the Strigoi, which are pretty much related, in a later video, and we'll get into the Taksim, more undead stuff later on. Do побачення.